Today, we'll talk about maritime security in the Indian Ocean. Our dialogue guest is Director Hubo of SCSPI and Admiral Jayanath Colombage of Pathfinder Foundation. Admiral and Professor Colombage has served the Sri Lankan Navy for a period of 36 years, and he was also the Additional Secretary to the President of International Relations and Secretary to the Sri Lanka Foreign Ministry. Good morning, Admiral, and thank you for coming to our dialogue.
Thank you. I'm happy to be with you, Dr. Yan and Professor. It's great to be with the two of you.
Thank you. Well, you see, our dialogue focused quite a lot on the Middle East in the past few episodes, and especially the U.S.-Israel-Iran war and its impact on the other parts of the world. It seems that currently the ceasefire agreement between the U.S. and Iran is currently on the brink of collapse, and it seems that highly likely that the U.S. and Israel will resume military strikes against Iran in the near future. And also the Strait of Hormuz will continue to impact on world energy supply. So I'm wondering whether, Admiral, can you share with us your opinion on the current situation in the Middle East from the perspective of the Indian Ocean countries, especially Sri Lanka?
This was a very unpredictable incident or unpredictable war, which is now taking place. Of course, there is a bit of a pause right now. What we see is a lot of rhetoric from both sides, blockade and counter-blockade, and also no one is blinking. But it appears that both sides want to have an end. I mean, they don't want to keep on fighting and getting distracted, but I think both are now suffering economically. Even America is suffering economically because when you look at the American consumer market, price of gas and fuel has gone up, and it impacts the American psyche. And currently, the president's ranking is quite low. So he is very worried about probably the midterm elections coming up and how to get, I mean, he need an exit right now from this situation. And similarly, on the Iran side, I'm sure they also want an exit strategy. But neither of the parties want to say that I'm giving in, I'm throwing the towel. Both are talking a lot of rhetoric. So we have rhetoric and counter-rhetoric, and accusations and counter-accusations, and blockade and counter-blockade. So this is actually not good for the entire world. Right now, entire world economy is in a bit of a problem. And some predict that it's going to be a worse economic recession than even in the 2008, right? And something like what happened in 1973, because right now we feel it in Sri Lanka. The price of US dollar has appreciated between the beginning of the war today by 50 rupees. Now, 50 rupees is roughly equivalent to maybe 1.1 yuan or something like that. So you can imagine if the dollar rise by 1 yuan, right, how much impact it will have on Chinese economy. Now, Sri Lanka is having quite a small economy, not as big as China. So this almost equivalent to 1 yuan increase in oil prices pre-Israel US attack to today, it is impacting everything in the country. Transport cost, fertilizer cost, no tourists coming, no fertilizer coming. It will impact our food security because I'm also a farmer. I grow rice and I need fertilizer, but I don't have. Because the fertilizer, mainly, we used to get it across the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz, right? So this actually impact basically the economy, but as a result, it impact the day-to-day life. Now, Sri Lanka has another problem because we were a bankrupt country in 2022 and we were trying to, raise our head. We did quite well in 2023, 24. Even now, I mean, we were okay. Our foreign reserves were increasing little by little because as per the agreement that we have entered with our lenders, 2028, we have to start repaying our loans. Now, to do that, our foreign reserves have to grow up. Now we have a huge problem, right? If I give you like one example, barrel of oil was around $72 before the conflict, and today is above 100. So that means there is a difference of about $28 per barrel. And we import about 1.3 million barrels per month. Now that means in addition to what we used to pay, we have to pay about 38 million US dollars. For a small economy like Sri Lanka, $38 million per month, it's a huge burden, right? Because of this war, tourists are not coming. Tourism is one of the main pillars of Sri Lankan economy. Tourists are not coming. Tourism has been dropped by 29%, right? And right now we may have a problem if there are about 1 million Sri Lankans working in the Middle East, if they lose their jobs and if they have to come back, it may not happen. It may be the other way around. If they want to rebuild, they may actually require more labor. I don't know. But in every sense, countries like Sri Lanka are impacted because of a war where we had no role, none whatsoever. We haven't attacked anyone. We have not supported to attack anyone, but we are suffering. That is one aspect. But then on the other hand, the attack by a US nuclear submarine on the Iranian frigate Irish Dana, very close to Sri Lanka, has added another dimension. Now, we were not part of it, but we were kind of dragged into it. There again, basically what we did was, according to the international commitments, we have a responsibility to rescue people in distress. That's exactly what we did. But then it became kind of a very hot topic, and still it is not resolved. But, we were dragged into the war through that Irish Dana attack also. Now, this is a small country, very peaceful country, who has not attacked anyone, who has not supported anyone to attack anyone. But see, we are suffering. Now, right now, our inflation is rising. Food prices are rising. There will be a problem with food security. If we don't get fertilizer this season, in 3 months' time, our crop will be very low, right? Now, the fiscal pressure, the loan payment pressure is also added. So we are impacted in every possible, every conceivable way. This is why we want this conflict to end and the Strait of Hormuz to be opened as it was before.
Yes, thank you, Admiral. So you think that the Sri Lanka is currently suffering economically, and also you're dragged into this crisis against your will. So in terms of maritime security issues, I wanted to talk about shifting balance of power in the Indian Ocean. You see that currently the turmoil in the Middle East has consumed significant U.S. attention. Do you think that this will weaken or strengthen India's role, as we often see that India is the net security provider in the Indian Ocean region? Do you think the current situation will weaken or strengthen India's role?
Well, Dr. Yan, I have to comment on one term that you use, India as a net security provider. India is not a net security provider in the Indian Ocean. India cannot be a net security provider in the Indian Ocean. Yes, Indian Ocean is not the biggest ocean. It is the third largest ocean in the world, 5 oceans, but still it is big, right? 2009, when the Somali pirates started hijacking ships, no single country could handle that. No one, not India, not Pakistan, not Yemen, no one could handle the Somali piracy in starting from like 2009 until about 2011. So that is why I say there is no net security provider in the Indian Ocean. And actually, even to be fair with the Indian, they don't use this term anymore. Right? I think they used this term some time ago, but now they say, no, we are not a net security provider, but we are a first respondent. Right? So that's, I think, a big difference. Now, the first respondent is not necessarily for maritime security, but it could be a natural calamity, or it could be a cyclone, it could be a tsunami, right? Or it could be a man-made disaster. Right. So now I think India is kind of course, they are in the neighborhood, so they can just go anywhere because they have their fleet, everything here. Right. So actually, India cannot be a net security provider, but India is a first respondent in the Indian Ocean in many situations. Even say, for example, if the Middle Eastern people have to be evacuated, I think India will go there first because they are in the neighborhood. They're in the neighborhood and they can do it. So this concept of net security provider, I don't buy that. I don't contribute to that. I think, but then your question is actually much broader than that term alone. Your question is about a balance of, balance of power in the Indian Ocean. Well, you are right. Now, we heard that in 2025, when America launched their national defense strategy, and little later when they launched their national security strategy, their main focus was Western Hemisphere, not the Indian Ocean, not the Asia. Main focus was Western Hemisphere. And that is why they wanted to take over Greenland, they wanted to capture Cuba, they wanted to capture Venezuela, and they wanted Mexico to be attached to them, and they wanted to rename the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. So everything was to make America great again in the Western Hemisphere. But then all of a sudden, we have this February 28th attack jointly launched by Israel and America against Iran. I don't know what their objectives were in the beginning of the war, but I have a feeling that whatever the objectives have not been achieved. Now we are in a very, very dangerous situation because this is like a half-baked cake now. You can't eat it, you can't throw it, right? So I think everyone is caught up in a very big trilemma because nobody wants to say that I am throwing the towel. Everybody say I have won. Now, when you look at statements coming from Iran and this authority that they are exercising on the Strait of Hormuz, they are acting as if they have won. That's how they act. Now, for nearly 75 days or little more than that, the Strait of Hormuz is closed, right? Now, America launched the Operation Freedom, and then they launched the blockade, but nothing worked. And they say thousands of ships are still stranded within the Persian Gulf. Now, Iran yesterday said that there was a movement of 26 ships, but I don't know how to verify that, whether it is true or whether it is again another propaganda gimmick. We don't know. So the first casualty in this situation is the truth. No one is telling us the truth. So this is a very dangerous situation. And earlier we resolved this, the whole world get together and put pressure on both sides. I'm not saying only Iranian side. Both sides mean Israel and US on one side. And then we have to force them to stop the war. We have to force them to open the Strait of Hormuz. And because everyone is suffering. Now, Iran cannot take all these countries into ransom, right? They are leverage. We understand their best leverage is the Strait of Hormuz. That's okay. We understand. It is their backyard. That is true. But they have no right. They have no legal right to block Strait of Hormuz. This is a strait used for transit passage by international ships for ages, right? So they have no right to close this. But I'm not saying that they are the only one who is at fault. They are using what they have. They are using what the weapons they have. They have missiles, they have drones, they have Strait of Hormuz, right? They are using all these three things very effectively. The mighty power, 3 aircraft carriers hovering around the Gulf of Aden, Red Sea, and the Mediterranean. Iran is not budging. So this is a very dangerous situation. We need to resolve this as quickly as possible. Otherwise, it will be a worst case of economic crisis for the world. There will be a food crisis. There will be starvation. There will be malnutrition, right? And people will come to the streets to protest because I don't think everyone understands the complexity of this situation, right? People would try to blame the government saying that you are not acting fast enough. Right? It will be chaos. So I think we need to find a way out.
Exactly. I agree with you, especially with the importance of Strait of Hormuz. I'm just a little pessimistic to think that probably this crisis of the Strait of Hormuz will be prolonged for quite a long time and will be settled anytime soon. I wanted to ask Professor Hubo, what do you think of the security situation in the Indian Ocean, and who is the security provider in the Indian Ocean? And what do you think of the Strait of Hormuz, strategic issues and legal issues, etc., etc.?
Before answer your question, I would like to conquer the points of the Admiral. I think I completely agree with you that no one wins in this war, and the world, including the Sri Lanka and other countries, suffered. The whole world suffered from this war. So the world should give some pressure on both sides, U.S., Israel, and Iran, to calm down and negotiate, especially to reopen the streets. Even I think that the Iran and the United States, Israel, all of them said that they had won completely, but the real situation is that just as Madam Admiral said, that actually no one wins. The war, I think even if the war resumed, I think the war has entered the rubbish time. As to your question, I think the US, India, they are not the security provider as in the Indian Ocean. As for instance, I think the US, United States, for a long time is, especially in the current time, the troublemaker of the maritime security in the Indian Ocean. You would say the situation of the Hormuz Strait and the other area. I think the US for a long time is a troublemaker in the Indian Ocean. The India is very ambitious to the Indian Ocean, but the reality is that I think the India must compete at least with the influence of the US. The India focuses on the presence and military activities of China or PLA, but the reality is that first of all, India must compete with the influence of US. Secondly, maybe there are some competition between China and India in the Indian Ocean. I think the India has exaggerated China's intentions. So I think no country can handle the maritime security issue in Indian Ocean. So no country can be a security provider. But I think the major powers, as long as the coast states of Indian Ocean, can jointly contribute to the security and the safety of the Indian Ocean. So I think that's an open question to all the countries, to all the coast states. Admiral had mentioned, I think the position of India as to the U.S. grant strategy has experienced some changes. If you say the last 1 or 2 years, there are some changes. Admiral mentioned the U.S. national defense strategy. It's true. The strategy mentions the Indo-Pacific strategy, but nowadays sometimes the U.S. shift to the Asia Pacific, not just the Indo-Pacific. So you will see there are some differences. I think the importance of India to the U.S. grant strategy, I think has been noted a little bit compared with several years before.
Thank you, Professor Hubo. And also, Admiral, I'm thinking because Sri Lanka is a very important international maritime hub. We have the Colombo port, we have the Hambantota port. So you've already mentioned about the food security issues and economic issues and trade issues that you are suffering now. So in terms of the ports and maritime hub, what tangible logistical and security pressures is Sri Lanka currently experiencing?
Well, that's a very good question because nobody really asked that question or touched that angle. Because, the shipping in the Indian Ocean is disrupted, right? It's not only the Strait of Hormuz, which is closed, but even the Bab el Mandeb is not secure because the Houthi rebels are threatening, right, that they would retaliate. And we all know that the Houthis are a proxy of Iran because that is how they get missiles, helicopters, speedboats, everything they get from Iran, right? Now, Houthis said they would target shipping. Now, shipping has to reroute all the way around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, right? It's a longer route, longer freight time, longer freight cost, longer insurance, right? Now, in this backdrop, there was a little advantage to Sri Lanka because the ships did not have business. The ships could not traverse to the Strait of Hormuz or through the Bab el Mandeb to the Red Sea. Majority of the ships are now hanging around Sri Lanka waiting. Now, in the beginning, where the disruption started, the shipping did not want to keep their cargo on board. What they did was they actually unloaded those cargo, the containers especially, in Sri Lankan ports, in Colombo and Hambantota. And also, now because of that, the Colombo container handling went up by about 11%, right? And then another thing happened because all these car carriers coming from Japan, China, and India, right? Now these big car carriers also could not traverse the ocean freely, right? Because these are very expensive cargo, right? I mean, it's not only the ship, but the cargo within a car carrier is also very expensive. So they did not want to risk carrying this cargo towards the Red Sea. I mean, Strait of Hormuz is completely out at the moment, but still there is a path through the Red Sea and Strait of the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean. So they unloaded their cars in the port of Hambantota, because port of Hambantota, we have a big port there. It was built by China Merchant Port Holding, and there was a lot of criticism about Hambantota port in the beginning. But now Hambantota port is also making a lot of money because most of the vehicles are now parked in Hambantota waiting for transshipment to another destination, maybe East Coast, I mean, Africa, Middle East, even Europe, right? And also, some ships unloaded their containers in Hambantota port. So there is a bit of a benefit to the shipping sector because the ships cannot go anywhere. There are large number of very large crude carrier tankers hanging around Sri Lanka now. And some we get some money because they are in our territorial waters anchored, right? Some are not in territorial waters beyond that, so we can't charge them. So we actually benefited a little from these initial stages, but now as not as much as that. But then that gain cannot be offsetted by the increase of oil price, right? That gain was very small, but the price hike of oil was massive, right? So this is the predicament of Sri Lanka as a hub port because it is in the center of the Indian Ocean, and it has two, of course we have three, but two main deep water ports, right? This is the only two deep water ports in this whole region. India has Visinjam, but it is not as deep as Sri Lankan ports. Bangladesh don't have, Pakistan don't have. So Maldives don't have, Sri Lanka has. So this is the situation. But although we gain a little, but we cannot offset that with the losses that we are suffering.
Thank you. So which means that the Sri Lanka does have some leverage, according to the current situation, but it's just no compared to its sufferings, especially in the energy sector. Yeah. Regarding the current crisis, we think many people think that China and India does have a maritime rivalry in Sri Lanka. And also people are thinking that there's a competition between these two countries in Sri Lanka. So do you think that when currently the concern is mostly on the Middle East crisis, do you think the competition between China and India in Sri Lanka will be cooled down, or do you think there are more things coming out?
Well, actually, logically, if you look at the issue between China and India, this is not a time for competition. This is a time for compromises, right? This is a time, both big powers, India is the big power in the Indian Ocean, China is a big power in the world, right? Both has a lot of leverage with Iran, and both have, peer leverage with US. So this is the time both these big countries, India and China, should forget about their differences, should forget about the strategic competition and think of the world. Now, both these countries are projecting as the leader of Global South, right? China with the Global Security Initiative, Global Development Initiative, Global Civilization Initiative, Global Governance Initiative, right? They projected an image as a leader, right? Now, India also say, okay, we also are in the league to be a leader for the South. So now this is the time these two major powers, China and India, to prove that they deserve to be the leader of the global south, even jointly. I don't see a situation where either of these countries becoming the leader for the global south independently. I don't see a situation anytime soon. But jointly, they can. So this is the time to prove that your leverage in this situation will be used for a community of shared destiny to look after the people of this world, like Sri Lanka, not only the people in India, but the other countries. So this is my personal opinion. I'm not representing a government opinion, but this is my wish.
Thank you, Admiral.
Okay. Yes, I also want to speak for China on this issue. I think China doesn't have some plan and strategy to compete with India in Indian Ocean. The problem is that India is very sensitive on PLA's normal activities and presence in Indian Ocean. So far, all the operations activities, I think Admiral knows very well that China PLA's operations activities in Indian Ocean are very normal. The problem is that India is very sensitive on that. India sees this kind of military deployment and military activities in the angle of China-India competition. So I think that's the problem. I think India thinks that India is its backyard. So India is very sensitive to every major powers, but especially sensitive to China's military presence and activities in Indian Ocean. So I think that's an issue. I think India should adjust its approach and its mindset on this issue. China is very glad to cooperate with India on the maritime security and the safety in Indian Ocean.
Yes. Well, Professor Hubo just mentioned that India is very sensitive of China's behavior and China's existence in the Indian Ocean. Well, what reminds me of one thing, Admiral, that I wanted to ask regarding foreign research vessels coming to Sri Lanka's territorial sea. I remember back to 2024, Sri Lanka refused all foreign research vessels to enter in its territorial sea, including the Chinese ones. So many people are thinking that whether Sri Lanka is under India's pressure or the United States pressure to refuse China's research marine vessels to come into its territorial sea. Do you have any insider information on that?
Not necessarily the insider information, but I understand the situation and I understand the thinking of the leadership here and the pressure that they are receiving from India. That part I understand. I don't have any insider information. Now, we call it Chinese survey vessels or research vessels or maritime scientific research vessels. India call it spy vessels, right? So this is one problem we have, right? We call it in one name, but India say these are spy ships, right? And then Sri Lanka used to do a lot of joint surveys with Chinese research vessels. Our universities, our maritime agencies did a lot of collaborative work, right? Jointly. Right, when the Chinese research vessels come here, our teams also embark on, and then they work together in different areas. They gather data, they share data. That was a very good working arrangement. We don't have any capabilities to do underwater survey, and we use in the Chinese survey capacities and capabilities to gather the most important information that we need as an island nation to progress our blue economy. We were doing it. But then, when Chinese research vessels started coming, India raised this issue. It was not a secret. I think there were a lot of discussion even in the public domain. And they said, we should not permit Chinese spy ships to come to our ports so that they will not be able to. But I don't understand the logic, because any ship can have freedom of navigation across the Indian Ocean. So if Chinese ships want to spy, they can just do it on the way. right? They can just move and do it on the way. I mean, they don't have to come to Port of Colombo to do that, right? So this logic, I'm not agreeing, but I think it is more symbolic. It is more symbolic than the logic, or more symbolic than the science behind it. India control Sri Lanka. That is the message India is trying to give. India is controlling Sri Lanka's foreign policy. India is controlling Sri Lanka's maritime policy. India is controlling who comes and who is not. But fortunately, this is applicable only to the survey vessels. So Sri Lankan government in 2024 said, we are giving a moratorium on all research vessels, including Indian research vessels. And then we said we are developing a standard operating procedure, SOP. And when we are ready with the SOP, we will get back to normal. But then there are certain things that any research vessel has to do from any country, not necessarily only limited to China, right? But this SOP is actually developed, and it was even sent to the embassies here, but not implemented, right? So not implemented. There again, I think the pressure is coming from India and also from USA. I mean, there were many statements coming from the US embassy that we should not welcome, not directly, but to give the meaning that we should not welcome Chinese research vessels, maritime scientific research vessels into our ports. Now, then we lost for about now 2 years. We cannot embark on research. Fortunately, there was one UN research vessel, Nansen, coming from Norway. They did a joint research very recently. So only that. In between, there was one French survey vessel came, but they did not come to do any survey. They had some logistical issues, and we permitted that to come. So right now, no Chinese research vessels, no Indian research vessels are coming to Sri Lanka. They are all waiting. I think China is waiting for the SOP to be promulgated and implemented, and India does not want us to promulgate it. So we are now caught between these two giants on this issue. And we don't have any capacity, as I mentioned. We want to do research. We want to do oceanographic surveys. We want to do hydrographic surveys. We want to find out the fish stocks, right? Impact on the corals. A lot of things we need to find out. We need to get some scientific data. But because of this conflict of interest, because now I think the professor also mentioned that if I answer the professor's observation in a slightly different way, from the beginning, we both agreed that there cannot be a net security provider. So if there cannot be a net security provider, what is the next alternative? That means work collaboratively. Now, that is the best option for the Indian Ocean security. If we all have, now Indian Ocean is a very rich ocean in fisheries and shipping. It is also the most popular ocean for maritime strategies. Every major power in this region has a maritime strategy for Indian Ocean. Despite that, now if you look the Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, more than 10 years, I mean, that is one of the oldest one. But maritime security is degrading every day. So that means none of these maritime strategies have worked. Now, if you look deeply as to why these maritime strategies are not working, they all have a hidden agenda. They all have something hidden. Although they talk very nicely about freedom, free and open. I mean, I always argue Indian Ocean is free. Indian Ocean is open, right? So you don't have to have another strategy to keep it open and free. But now we know where the problems are. The choke point vulnerability, non-state actors, piracy, narcotic trade, illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, environmental degradation. There are common problems. So best option is for Indian Ocean to have an inclusive maritime strategy for Indian Ocean. Inclusive, the word inclusive is critically important. All these strategies that I mentioned are exclusive in nature. That is why they're not working.
Yes, we can call it like our common interest of the Indian Ocean, well, around Indian Ocean countries and also for other countries in the whole world. Well, Professor Hubo, Admiral Colombage just now mentioned that, well, if China really wanted to spy on Sri Lanka or on India, well, it doesn't necessarily to send a ship to go to the port of Sri Lanka. You can during navigating through the oceans. Well, you're an expert on this issue. So in terms of intelligence gathering techniques, do you think that China has an ambition to collect intelligence gathering of the India or other Indian Ocean countries? Or do you think that our research vessels does have to just wanted to do research there?
I think the vessels deployed in the Indian Ocean, as I think it is most of them for scientific research and collaborated by other countries, not just for China's research. There are also some, is a famous case, the Yuanwang, I think the vessel is for the airspace exploration. I think there is speculation and imagination. The fundamental issue is that India doesn't like any kinds of China's ships, including PLA vessels, including the research vessels, even I think even the merchant vessels, they just doesn't like. So that makes them think too much. I have no idea that we need to spy on India in Indian Ocean. We have other a lot of other tools and means. And also, I think India doesn't obey the international law, especially EEZ. India restricts the military activities in its EEZ very seriously. So that jeopardizes the freedom of navigation. I think even the US doesn't agree on that. So sometimes the US was conduct follow-ups in India's EEZ. That's a complicated issue. So I think in the international community as to security provider, I think that Sri Lanka, performed much better than India. So in the case of the Admiral mentioned that when the Iran's frigate had been ambushed by US submarines, I think it was the Sri Lanka search and rescue operations and saved the lives of the marine, of the sailors. So that's very important. I think got high credit in the world for Sri Lanka.
Indeed. I remember Sri Lanka's like 180 navies of Iran in that situation.
We had 206 Iranian naval personnel with us because there were two ships, Irish Dana and Irish Bashar. Yeah. So we had nearly 206 people. Yeah. And that became a big issue, but now they have gone. But still we have a ship with us.
Even in India, I think some Indian experts said that why it was India to do that.
Because they actually went to join the Indian fleet review in Visakhapatnam, and they went on their invitation, and then they were going out back to their country. Yeah. And when on the way the war broke out, so I think Sri Lanka took little time to consider all the factors because we did not want to get involved or dragged into a war. And then, of course, this unfortunate incident happened. Now, this is a critical threat to Sri Lanka. It is a critical threat to maritime domain awareness of Sri Lanka as well as India, because this happened in Sri Lanka, mean very close to India. So this is a problem that we have. I mean, our knowledge about our ocean around us, it's not good. So that is why in the beginning, I said no one can be the net security provider. So we have to think of some mechanism to inclusively work and voluntarily come to some kind of de-escalation measures, reporting measures, hotlines, so that we exchange information very quickly. Indian Ocean has information fusion centers, many, Singapore, India, Sri Lanka, but zero coordination. We just act on our own, right? Because there is one problem in this ocean, the mistrust. We don't trust anyone. We don't trust each other. This is a problem, right? Actually, there is one thing I like to add to what Professor said, because China actually has named 5 underwater ridges in the Indian Ocean, right? Whereas India has not named a single ridge, because China was doing this for a very long time, the underwater research. So they have named 5 ridges in the Indian Ocean. So no name for India yet. Now that may be another reason why they're not willing to welcome. But as you know, that in the Chinese survey vessels can go through the international waters anywhere. So there is freedom of navigation for any vessel at anywhere.
The Indian Ocean countries does not trust each other. Well, it seems to me that in the South China Sea and the Asia Pacific and other oceans of the Asia Pacific, we see more maritime cooperation within the coastal states. Like, for example, in the Strait of Malacca, 3 bordering countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, they all have this joint patrol of Strait of Malacca, and we also have the recap mechanism, and we have other mechanisms that involves more parties to come to safeguard the very important sea lane of communication in our region. So in the Indian Ocean, we also have some multilateral mechanisms like the IOR and everything else. Well, talking about the principles of maritime cooperation and everything. So do you have any examples of like practical maritime cooperation, like just name 1 or 2 or just some of them in the Indian Ocean?
Well, you brought out a good point, how ASEAN countries are working together, right? So because of they are working together, I think the threat to close Malacca Strait is quite low.
Exactly.
Right? Not because, not like Strait of Hormuz, it's between 2 countries and Iran is a major player. But here, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, they all have a stake in the Malacca Strait. If the Malacca Strait is closed, all their economics are gone, right? So they have an incentive to keep the Malacca Strait open, not for China, not for Japan, not for South Korea, but for the sake of everyone. And then again, the ASEAN works better as a regional organization. South Asia, the SAARC is defunct, it's dead, not working at all, right? So ASEAN they have a better way of working together. And their economy is integrated, and their currency is common payment system. They have among many 5-6 countries, right? There are problems in ASEAN, true. Myanmar is a problem. Vietnam, China, South China Sea issue is a problem. East Timor is another problem. But they still work together, right? Now, if you look at the Indian Ocean, the next question that you asked, we have IORA, Indian Ocean Rim Association. We have IONS, Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. These are like 25 years or more, right? But they are still working in their own silos, right? We call it watertight compartments, right? And they meet, they talk, they have summits, and then they meet again the next year. But the delivery is a problem. So I feel that we need some benchmarks, we need some measurements of delivery. Not only talk and have a good summit to boost the image of a leader, to boost the image of a country, and then you go your separate way. No, I think we need some hard targets, right? You do this by this time, right? So now we have a problem because our regional mechanisms for Indian Ocean is a bit of a contentious issue. Because in one, Pakistan is not a member of IORA, right? So there is another problem, right? And also when you look at the Indian Ocean, the Western Indian Ocean is where all this trouble are. Arabian Sea, Yemen, Iran, Somalia, Bab el-Mandeb, Strait of Hormuz, all these are in the Western Indian Ocean. The Bay of Bengal on the other side is, relatively peaceful, except the Myanmar situation with the military and the Rohingya, the illegal, irregular migration by sea issue. Bay of Bengal is more calm. So now we have another regional organization to work for the Bay of Bengal, that is called the BIMSTEC, right? Bay of Bengal Multilateral Institute for Technology and Economic Cooperation. So that has to work. At least if you cannot resolve all matters in the Indian Ocean, let's resolve the Bay of Bengal, let's work hard, fast to keep some kind of a understanding in the Bay of Bengal. I think that's one way to look at it, because we cannot make the entire Indian Ocean peaceful. Iran is not going to go away. Somalia situation is not really improving. Yemen situation is not really improving. There are so many factions fighting each other. And now Pakistan and Afghanistan is another flashpoint. And Pakistan and India is another flashpoint. And both are nuclear weapon states. So Western Indian Ocean is really difficult to bring peace. But the Bay of Bengal is a possibility.
I would like to add something that I agree with you that the eastern part of the Indian Ocean seems better compared with the west part of the Indian Ocean. I have some concern and worry about that because of the Strait of Hormuz and because of Iran's operations. Some countries have shown some intentions to copy the India's activities in other places, such as Malacca. The Indonesia financial minister said that we have also told the vessels in Malacca, but even after that, Indonesia side said that, which is not a serious speak. But even that, I think there are some intense motivations. I have noticed that India has launched a very big, very large project in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. I think that I am not sure how deeply and how importance of this kind of project to the situation. This island group are just out of the mouth of the Malacca Strait.
Yeah, Andaman Nicobar. Because, to go to Malacca Strait, you have to cross the Andaman Nicobar Islands on that side. Yes. And then through Indonesia, you have Lombok and Sunda Straits through Indonesia. I know this Indonesian minister said that we also should charge money. But then they cannot do it, I think, because Singapore also a Malacca Strait country, and Malaysia is also a Malacca Strait country. So all three have to agree to charge money from shipping. So this, I think, is a very dangerous precedent we are going to create to the world. If we start paying money to go through the Strait of Hormuz, most of the other straits used for international
they will follow, definitely.
They will follow. This is extremely bad for the freedom of ocean commerce. Freedom of navigation and freedom of ocean commerce is really bad. So we must not allow to create a precedent in the Strait of Hormuz. Not only that, then Maldives will say, if someone is going through us, because they also have two channels, right? Maldives is a long country, 1,000 islands, and ships have to go through them in order to cross to the Arabian Sea. So everyone starts charging. Where is the freedom of the ocean? This is a very dangerous thing. But I think Malacca Strait, this will never become a reality because the situation is not.
Yes, I agree with that. But I think the India has shown some intentions to improve its control to the. I think India want to participate in to influence the situation of the Malacca Strait.
Probably yes. And I don't know how to comment on the Andaman Nicobar because that is Indian territory. So if they want to develop that territory, I don't think anyone can say anything. But you see now, when the port of Hambantota was developed in Sri Lanka, India said, oh, that is a Chinese port and it's going to be a Chinese military post. So similarly, a port can be a dual use, right? I mean, this is my observation, but I don't think anyone can object to the development in Andaman Nicobar because it's Indian territory, Indian land. And, and it's a very important strategic location because that is actually the linkage Bay of Bengal to the Malacca Strait.
Yes. Seems that we have more things to concern regarding the maritime security in the Asia Pacific. And looking to the future, Admiral just now mentioned there are so many flashpoints in the Indian Ocean that are worrisome, including the Pakistan and Afghanistan. But we do see that Pakistan is trying to contribute to the ceasefire in the Middle East. So in terms of Sri Lanka and peace mediation, Sri Lanka is a historic proponent of these non-aligned movement. Sri Lanka work alongside other countries like India or other countries to make a contribution to the ceasefire in the Middle East, or do you have any plans to be involved in helping to the ceasefire?
I observe a new phenomena recently, especially after this Iranian situation, that is the strategic silence, not commenting even. Now, the world has come to that level. Even when we know something is wrong, we are not commenting on it. We are not commenting anything on it. We just keep quiet because we are suffering and we say we are neutral. Okay, neutrality is good enough. But when something terribly wrong is happening in our neighborhood, at least we must have the courage to say this is wrong, right? At least we must have the courage to say, please stop this nonsense. We are suffering, right? At least we must have a voice by the rest of the countries in the Indian Ocean collectively, together with other nations who are major maritime users in the Indian Ocean, to say this is wrong. So this is why I say we have entered into a new strategic arena called the strategic silence. This is not good. If someone has done something wrong, we may be a small country, but we have to say it is wrong, right? We are not saying anything. We just want to save left and right everything. Finally, we may even lose everyone by trying to do that, right? So the strategic neutrality is okay, right? That is the only way. We cannot take sides in the Indian Ocean. We cannot go only with India. We cannot go only with China. We cannot go only with America. We cannot go only with Japan. So different countries have different things for us. India is security, China is commercial, Japan is commercial, America is our main export location, right? So different countries have different things. We have to manage all. But this strategic silence is really puzzling me. Why are countries not even calling a spade, right? We don't, right? We pretend that, okay, Iran is a good friend. Of course, we have had dealings with Iran for a long time. That is true. We exported tea to Iran. Great. We used to buy a lot of crude oil from Iran at a fairly reasonable price. All that is great. Now, America is our main export destination. I mean, when our export destinations, America is first, European Union is second. So because of that, we don't say anything. I think we are not really doing justification. We are not standing on the right side in the history. We are nowhere, right? This is common to many countries here. Nobody is saying anything against anyone. This is a very dangerous thing, right? We should have, my thinking is, for Indian Ocean security, we all have to work inclusive, collaboratively to have comprehensive security.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree with you, Admiral. I think no country can build an exclusive maritime order in the world. So inclusive is very, very important in the South China Sea, in Indian Ocean, and other sea areas.
Yes, I do feel that the inclusive maritime interest should be a common maritime interest for all the countries in the whole world, not just for the Indian Oceans as well. So, and also regarding my final question to Professor Hu Bo is that regarding the strategic silence, we see that when the Middle East crisis, especially the Iran's closure of the Hormuz, like 2-3 weeks ago, I think the United States called for China's joint patrol to safeguard the Strait of Hormuz. And also last week when Admiral Colombage and I were attending the same conference in Colombo, and there are some people thinking that China should make more contributions to the Middle East crisis to help, especially to safeguard the open and the Navy freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. And they're thinking that China does not do enough contribution to the Middle East crisis. What do you think, Professor Hu Bo?
I think the China's position is very clearly that we enter the war. United States and Israel launched against Iran, and we also anti Iran's operations in the Hormuz Strait. I think we push on both sides to to some degree. So we don't like the wall that blocked of the strait. That's very, very clear. And as to the China's, I think China has contributed a lot in terms of diplomacy front. And also we have given some economic support for some suffered countries, especially including the Southeast Asia countries. As to the military contributions, I should say China is very cautiously to participate the overseas military operations only if the operations has been agreed by the United Nations Security Council. So the PLA Navy has patrolled the Aden area for more than I think for more than 70 years. The reason is that because we have the permission, we have the agreement of the UN Security Council. So that's very important for China. China couldn't send the vessels to Hormuz Strait, reopen the strait. Even the European countries, the US allies doesn't respond. So why China respond to do that? If we did it in this way, that means that China directly involved in the war. China couldn't do that. We should, based on international law, we enter the war, so we don't want to be on board. So that's very, very simple. But if the international committee, especially UN Security Council, has some resolution on the situation, I think that definitely China can contribute the military forces to implement the resolution.
And also my final question to Admiral Colombage is with the current situation, what irreversible changes do you foresee in the future in terms of security architecture of the Indian Ocean, and what the Indian Ocean's coastal states should do to tackle those challenges?
Unless we are very careful in this situation, it will be like the law of the jungle here, right? Disregard to the international law, disregard to the international conventions. Now, Professor Hu just mentioned that, if the United Nations Security Council, who are supposed to determine whether to attack a country or not, whether to patrol or not, that should be the way to go forward, right? Because there is a huge asymmetry in the Indian Ocean countries. Sri Lanka is a small country, India is a big country, China is a major power, right? Now, in order to survive in this situation, the most important instrument for smaller countries is the respect for international law. If that is not there, it will be anyone's game, right? We will be nobody, because if somebody says, America does not have any regard for international law or for international institutions. They withdrew from 62 international institutions. Out of that, about 32 are UN institutions, right? So they are not there now. Now, that doesn't mean the others should follow the same example of lawlessness. Mighty is the power. No, that should not be the case. So for us to survive, it is critically important that the international law is respected, international instruments are implemented, right, across the board. And then we are all considered sovereign, independent countries. We can survive. Otherwise, if this current trend continues and spill over to Indian Ocean, the might is power. That is going to be the end of the Indian Ocean. So I would really wish that we come back to the law and order, international respect for international law situation. But your question is, what will happen to the balance of power? Now, this again, you see, when Somali piracy happened in 2009, it was proven that there cannot be a single net security provider. Now, current situation re-emphasizes the same thing, right? Current situation, if we want to draw lessons from the current situation and think of our future, the future of the next generation, we have to work together. That is my sincere wish, inclusive, comprehensive, mutually understanding, mutually beneficial agreement to operate in the Indian Ocean. Because whether the American power is going down. I don't want to comment on that, but definitely the power is changing. There is no power has stayed forever in the world. There were much greater empires which collapsed, right? I mean, that is one, I think, during the visit of President Trump to President Xi mentioned, if we work as peers, we can both win, right? And it will be best for the world, right? But if we have competition, we both will lose and it is bad for the world. So I think when you look at the world point of view, respect for international law, not thinking of fighting each other, but how to collaborate. There are so many areas that we can easily collaborate in the Indian Ocean. Everyone, environment, countering non-state actors, narcotic, IUU fishing, human smuggling, weapon smuggling, so many areas. There are there. We have to work together.
Thank you, Admiral. I would like to really thank our two guests today, Admiral Colombage and Professor Hubo. I really enjoyed today's discussion, and thank you again for accepting my invitation to be on our show. And thank you to the friends who like our discussion and our dialogue. Please just subscribe our channel and become our followers. Thank you, Admiral and Professor Hubo. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yang.